Hey, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Hospitable Host podcast. I'm your host, Miles, from the Hospitable team. And today we're diving into a topic that's on everyone's mind, artificial intelligence. The listeners that are already Hospitable customers and or watched our recent 2025 Roadmap Town Hall will know that Hospitable is going big on AI in 2025. Another company with a keen AI focus is Tidy, and we have Chris Hawkins, CEO of Tidy, here today to tell us more about his view on AI in short-term rental operations management. If you like today's episode, please don't forget to like, share, and rate us on whichever platform you are listening to. Hey, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Miles.
No worries. So, Chris, maybe we can get started with a bit of an introduction of yourself and Tidy.
Great. Well, prior to Tidy, I've been in the software industry for a while. Previously, I co-founded a company called SideNow. We raised some venture capital with some great investors. We sold that business. We did the first online notary service as a part of that. So we did some really cool things there. For the next business, we really wanted to tackle something we saw as a bigger problem. And I did this with my co-founder, Andrew Ellis. And we decided sort of cleaning and maintenance was really hard to do in sort of our personal lives. And we thought some software to manage that would have been great. And then as we got into it more and more, that business has progressively become more and more focused on rental space, and particularly kind of short-term rental space, because that's where it's infinitely more complex to manage that stuff with the short-term rental situation in particular.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. So we're here obviously today to talk about AI in particular. We're obviously hearing a lot about AI across various industries. From your perspective at Tidy, how do you see AI specifically shaping the landscape of property management, especially for short-term rentals, this year and beyond?
Great. Yeah. And so what Tidy does, and I missed this before, but Tidy helps automate cleaning and maintenance. And so what we were very focused on is really how to actually save people time and effort in the management layer of the stuff. So we're not actually going on site and doing any cleaning or doing any maintenance, but there's still a lot of work to be done in the management layer. And different, for some people, for a solo Airbnb host, this is kind of the time of the owner or the manager. But if this is somebody with many properties, they might even have an operations team or person that is full-time dedicated to this role. And so what we're really tackling is that piece of it. Where we see AI come in is mostly in two places. One is predicting what may happen because you never know for sure. And the other thing is kind of communication or dealing with kind of, we would call them fuzzy inputs. So more specifically, facilities management software has been around for a long time, actually since like the 80s. And that's where people could go in. So if you would have been on a college campus in like the year 1989, there might be a software system where you could click, you could make work orders and you can assign things to people. Now, why is that even today still not widely used in the short-term rental space? For two reasons. One is it's a lot of work to kind of navigate those interfaces. Like it's not worth it, honestly, to create a work order and do all this stuff. It just sounds like it's more annoying than it's worth. Yeah. And that's probably the biggest reason why. And then the other thing is that when you're dealing with short-term rentals, a lot of times you're dealing with outside vendors, and it's very hard to coordinate. You can't just assign somebody a job and then have them do it 100% of the time. There's some probability that it will actually happen and stuff like that. So we use AI for two things. So we predict, will somebody accept a job request? So if I'm saying, hey, I need a cleaning done here, we know based off of this person's history, either with you or with others, if we have more data on them, or other signals that we're getting from them, will they accept the job? Will they show up to the job? What's the probability of them not showing up to the job even after they've accepted it? So we're using kind of traditional probabilistic AI tools there. And then the other piece that we do is using, and this is more recent, using large language models, things like OpenAI's models and other models as well, to allow to sort of understand what people are saying and try to let people, because these cleaners and maintenance people, they love text messaging is probably the number one thing. So as they're texting back and forth, how can we say, if they text and say, hey, I'm running 15 minutes late, is that okay? How can we actually handle that and push that up to the owner or get authorization like kind of automatically if possible. So dealing with that kind of more like text-based input instead of like having them go through and like click a button to say something.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess that kind of points out some of the operational pain points that you see AI addressing, right? So cleaner availability being a key one there, and something that short-term rental hosts struggle with a lot. Fair to say?
Yeah, I think now there's AI being useful beyond what we're doing. Obviously, I think guest communication is going to be a big area. It's not something we're likely to touch, um, uh, but but yeah, I think any place where there's a communication component, I think AI is going to be increasingly involved, and I think many people are probably already starting to either use or experiment with tools for that, like now.
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe you can tell me a bit more about how, I guess, Tidy in particular, and I guess how AI has been used to kind of help with that kind of logistical nightmare of multiple cleaners across multiple properties and maintenance as well, not just cleaners, I guess, and if that falls into your remit as well.
Yeah. So typically, when we work with a customer at Tidy, what we start with first is saying, "Hey, what are your current workflows?" So it might start with, "What's the list of people you already use?" We call them pros. They could be your employee, but they could be an outside vendor, and many times they are. Most of the time, I think they probably are. And so we just figure out like, oh, do you prefer if you have like Alice, Bob, and Charlie? Do you tend it to always Alice first, or how do you what's your setup? And then we recreate that in Tidy, which is software to kind of organize all these workflows. And maybe one person only wants a phone call, one person prefers text. We try to capture all the preferences and really kind of recreate what your existing workflow is as best as possible in the software. And then for us, AI is kind of it's tightly integrated into the software. So it means like, let's just say if we get a reservation in from your PMS system, or we're just pulling in directly from Airbnb or whatever we're using, but let's just say we're using Hospitable, and then we're sucking in those reservations from Hospitable. What we'll do is we'll see them pop up, and then based off of the rules we have in your account, we'll create what we call a job request, and then we're going to send that out to the people on your list. Now, some of the communication there might be automated. Well, typically that first like volley of communication is just going to be more like a template response. So if we say, "Hey, we're going to text Alice, Bob, and Charlie to see if any of them can take this job," they can reply back, and then that's when we might use either AI, and we have a human fallback system we call our concierge, allow them to basically just text you back and say, "Yeah, I can do the job." So they can go and push a traditional kind of button to do something, but they don't have to, which I think is important because there's a wide range of people in the space that don't always want to use software. Sometimes it's just easier to not use it. Anyway, so that's kind of one specific example. That's just kind of trying to get something accepted. And then, kind of as the job gets closer, we're going to use a kind of a combination of like triggered events, which are not really AI, but just like, hey, this amount of time before a job, do we need to send a reminder or whatever? But also kind of AI throughout the mix to kind of interpret if people are like responding to messages.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'd love to kind of think about kind of future gazing a little bit, and where you see AI going with Tidy in particular, but then also I guess just more generally in the industry, and how that can apply to more operations, I guess, tasks. So one thing that I want to kind of ask you is, do you think that we'll get to a point where paying for cleaners and paying for those services, we're going to have dynamic pricing like we do with nightly rates, with AI kind of helping us decide how much we're paying cleaners based on demand, supply, and quality of a clean?
I think so. With the dynamic pricing, we actually have some things in there today. When I mentioned that we have probabilistic price, or we predict the probability of someone accepting the job. Some of that is based around like, is it a short-term kind of emergency request? If you're asking someone to be there in 2 hours, what's the price you're offering them? And with some cleaners or maintenance people, you have a good relationship, and you can throw the occasional last minute request to them and they'll be okay. And in other cases, you really need to maybe throw some more money at them in order to move them. So I do think it would be easier to do some of this stuff, but it is a little bit, I think a lot of this is still kind of relationship driven. If you're a good customer, they're going to, people are going to do more for you than when you're new, and you're going to have to kind of, build that trust. So I'm not sure if it's going to be wildly dynamic, but I do think we'll probably see some more of that going on. Well, yeah, it's interesting to think about, could you pay more for like higher quality work? I think it's interesting conceptually. I think the reality is most people have like a standard that they want people held to. Yeah. So what we see, and I don't think I will change this particularly, but is that they have some standard. If you don't meet the standard, they either don't want to pay you at all, or they may want to do some sort of like penalty. So I think that, which is a way of dynamic pricing. And so it may manifest that way to say like, hey, if you don't achieve all of these goals, there's going to be some penalty. And I think my expectation is that would be rarely applied, but if there's something really wrong, that it would take place. So that's another approach for it. I do think a lot of this will change as kind of robots start to become either augment or in some cases, in some ways, replace kind of human labor, which we do think is coming. We're not exactly sure the timeline of it, and we're not exactly sure the form it will take. But there are a lot of people working on the robotic space. It's a hobby. It's a hobby of mine too. I haven't touched it in a couple of years. So we built some prototypes, kind of in the 2018 timeframe, to see how close we thought we were, and the answer was we're not quite there yet. Was what where we came away from that. So that will definitely change things once those start to hit houses.
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess before we get to that point, we obviously talked about quality there. Does Tidy have any tools to help ensure that high quality, right, and make sure that standards are being met? How do we police those as a short-term rental host? How do we make sure that we're hitting that kind of that criteria of clean and getting that standard that we want? Because, like you say, it's not really, I guess, a scale of quality. It's binary, right? It's either it's right and it's good and it's welcoming for guests, or it's not. Something's off. How do we ensure that?
Yeah. Two ways. One would be kind of the vetting up front of the people that you're working with, which can mean different things to different people. So you can have the VRMA, for example, has their own kind of certifications you can use. We can support those. You can just send people through. There's things as simple as background checks, which don't really help with quality, but you might want to do those. You may want to do, anyway, there may be things you want to do on the front end with vendors, checking insurance requirements, stuff like that. So we can help facilitate kind of the onboarding of them. None of those are like really closely correlated to like the quality of their work, but they're things that are maybe generally related. But the bigger thing that people do with us is digital checklists for the pros to follow. So even if pros kind of say they know what they're doing, having a checklist to walk through can be very helpful. And when they're doing this, most of the time, or maybe not all the time, but much of the time, they're also asking them to maybe take inventory of items, take photos or videos. These can be helpful for disputes or damage claims against the guests or what have you. So a digital checklist is something that is very helpful. There's kind of trade-offs here. You don't want to micromanage like every single detail. You wouldn't want to say, hey, like tuck in one side of the bed, tuck in the other side of the bed, or you could go a little crazy there. But everything that is important as part of your process, if you add it to a checklist, you can really make sure that nothing is missed. And so we find that to be very valuable, and we do recommend that across the board. And then when they do take photos or videos of kind of before and or after the job, depending on what you want done, then we can send that to be inspected. And these days, the inspection can happen with the property manager or the host, or you can have our team do it. And that is an area where we don't have AI doing it right now, but we're looking at how do we kind of do that with AI. Like how do we, and I think we likely to be done in 2025. I think all the core technology is there to kind of match human level. It's not as good. These remote inspections are not as good as in person. Like you can't get all the nuance, but they're cheap, they're fast. So there's a big advantage there. So we expect kind of have that piece done with AI by the end of the year.
That's quite interesting. We at Hospitable recently implemented basically a guest sentiment analysis feature. So looking at messages from the guests and kind of calling out things like the aircon was broken, right, or they're not happy about something, and that's going to prevent a request for a review to be sent. Basically, request pushing for that positive review, making sure that you're messaging them first and handling that issue before we jump straight to hey, give us a 5-star review. Do you think that we could see something similar in kind of cleaning and maintenance and kind of looking at, I guess, predictive maintenance issues, right? Spotting things that could be an issue for future guests and making sure that we're kind of calling our handyman or handywoman to come and take a look before something bigger and worse happens with that.
I think so. I think, honestly, I think a lot of preventative maintenance is really just the main way I think it's going to play out probably is preventative maintenance stuff is normally just there's like every like appliance you have, everything that you have has kind of like a list of what's recommended, and kind of just nobody or very few people actually follow that list or have it all written down. And it's, again, goes back to that it's just kind of hard to do it. And so it's not really worth it. So where I think AI is going to be most helpful is just kind of really making that automatic and then providing the manufacturers or builders or whatever, recommendations just kind of off a list. So where we would like to see that going, we've done some experimentation here, but we're not quite there yet. But we'd love it where you could just kind of input your home, maybe take a video of everything, and then we pull in all the appliance models, and we can just match it to what the manuals say should be done, and then kind of have this schedule of things. That is something that we would love to see done, and I think would be great. And then I think when people are on site and cleaning maintenance people are on there, they're taking photos. It would be great if we could use those things to update our kind of models of what's going on in the house. Like, could you identify a leak in the roof or something like that? And I think maybe some of this stuff might be hard without like dedicated inspectors, because it's like that example, like, is the cleaner going to be taking a picture of the roof? I don't know. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I would even think, even as like, let's just say inspectors speeding up the inspection flow, because you're able to let them just kind of take videos and say notes and do the inspections like twice as fast, means they could potentially be half the cost, and then you might be able to do them more frequently to identify problems. So I think it'll play out in interesting ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so maybe less future gazing now, and just thinking about kind of today and practical applications. You've obviously spoken about how Tidy is using AI. What are some of the ways that you think short-term rental hosts can embrace AI in kind of their daily tasks? And how's the Tidy team embracing it as well? Not just in its product, but I guess internally, how's the team using AI to kind of improve their workflows?
Internally, the way we are trying to encourage like all the different teams, we've got sales, marketing, engineering, support. In all those roles, we're encouraging everybody to use AI in different ways. And so with some of the departments, we started telling them like, hey, think of yourselves as more of like a manager of AIs than a person. I don't know, that's the wrong way of saying it, but you are a person too. But maybe the first drafts of marketing content can be done with an AI, and then your job is really to it's like having an army of interns or whatever, and now you have that at your disposal. So use it, but don't just let it go through unfiltered, unfettered, because then you typically don't get good results there. And so I think that's true probably across the board. And then how short-term, managers should or might be able to use it is, I do think there are a lot of solutions out there. And AI it doesn't have to be AI. Some of these things can be software. We think of it a little bit more like automation than AI, because sometimes the best tool is more like a traditional software tool, and AI is not helpful. But I do think, like, across the board, you've got price optimization, listing optimization, guest communication. So I think if you were just think about the whole kind of stack from a person like trying to find your property in like a listing site, all the way through booking it and negotiating, maybe doing upsells, right? And then getting the cleaning maintenance done. I think throughout the stack, software can be helpful, and AI, can often be helpful as well. So yeah, I think we see that kind of all over the place. Upsells is something we're spending a little bit more time on too, and trying to make sure that if you want to start offering more upsells, like how do you do that? More easily.
Okay. Cool. I think we're coming to the end now, but obviously would love to give you one final chance to shout out Tidy and where people can go to find out more.
Yeah, would love to check out Tidy. You can go to tidy.com. So it's pretty easy. We have a great partnership with Hospitable, so we'd love to see you, help you, and our sales team is happy to help you get set up with everything. We can do 100% of the setup for you with our team for free and set up a pilot. So that's typically the best way to get going.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris. It's been great.
Thanks, Miles.
Hello there. Thank you again for listening in to today's podcast episode. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to like and share. We would really appreciate it. Thanks.